For those of you who are new, I'm Terri, and I've lost track of how many weeks this is now that we've been talking about prayer. And I want to start in a little sideways way. For those of you who know me, some of you know that I've been an artist since I was pretty young, but I've always struggled with consistency. And I know really well that in order to grow as an artist, one of the things that you can do is to develop a daily practice and challenge yourself to engage in some kind of art every single day. And I know personally that if I only produce art when I feel like it, I won't really grow as an artist. I won't grow beyond what I already know. I won't discover new things. And if I wait too long, I might even lose the skills that I've developed. So a couple of weeks ago, I joined something called the 100-Day Challenge, where I'm producing just something in my art journal every day. And some days have been easy and some days have been frustrating. But I'm actually surprised already at the growth that I'm seeing, even though I've only been doing it for a couple of weeks. Now, art is a lot like prayer in that way, where if you care, if you really want to grow beyond where you are today, you're going to have to stop relying on inspiration, the feeling. You're going to have to push beyond your feelings to develop a daily practice of prayer. All of us need a regular rhythm of prayer that's going to help us to return again and again to God. And today I'm going to talk about liturgy as one of the ways of developing this kind of daily prayer practice, although I don't want you to think that I'm suggesting that this is the only way. Liturgy literally means public worship, which is surprising to some people. And it's technically designed to be prayer that a community engages in together, but it can be engaged in as an individual as well. It's basically a set of written prayers, some scripture readings, reflections that have sort of stood the test of time. The liturgical prayers that are prayed throughout the world today are pretty much a form of the prayers that were used centuries ago. And they've nourished the church and directed her to praise, to confess, to remember both good times and bad. And since these prayers have survived so much for so long, I think they really deserve some serious consideration from us. Now, I have been praying the daily office, which is basically just a set of liturgical prayers designed for morning and then midday and evening. I've been doing that on and off for probably the last 10 years. But I've really found that I've been particularly helped by this prayer form over the last year of this pandemic, especially as fatigue and isolation have started to kind of wear on me. At some point, I found that I kind of ran out of words to pray. And it felt like this enormous gift to me to have words to pray that I didn't have to generate on my own. And as I've prayed these prayers, I become more and more aware of the communities all over the world who are praying those same prayers. And I've begun to feel a kind of kinship with them. They've kind of kept me company and reassured me that I'm not alone, even when I really do feel very alone. Liturgical prayer has kind of become this place of rest and community for me. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about liturgical prayer because information about it really won't get you very far. So I'm going to just cover some misconceptions, some of the benefits of this form of prayer, a few tips, and then we're actually going to go through an evening prayer from the daily office together. So there's a couple of things that used to really trip me up about liturgical prayer when I first started engaging in it. And the first thing was that I felt like praying written prayers, other people's prayers, was kind of a betrayal of this intimate relationship that I was supposed to have with God. And if those prayers, those written prayers, were the only prayers that I ever prayed, that would be a kind of a legitimate criticism. But written prayers like these liturgies, are just a portion of a healthy prayer life. And if you think about it, all of us have repetitive ways of communicating important things, even to the people that we are most intimate with. When Dave leaves for work at the beginning of the day, I say almost the same things to him as he's walking out the door. And it's not because I don't care about him. The opposite is true. I always say these exact words pretty much as he's leaving the house because they're really important things. And I don't have to think them up new every day. Be careful, honey. I love you. I'll see you tonight. This is kind of my morning liturgy with Dave. The other thing that used to kind of trip me up, and it's closely related to that issue of the potential of a lack of intimacy, and that is that the liturgy it has a repetitive nature. These liturgies contain some unique readings, some space for my own prayers, but much of the daily office that I'm practicing consists of the same prayers every single day. Now, when I first began to pray the daily office, this surprised me, and eventually it really bored me. But I came to realize that the repetition was actually a benefit if I could manage to stay present to those words. Repetitive prayers aren't designed to inform us or stimulate us or interest us. They're designed for us to actively participate in the daily rhythms of praise and confession, encouragement, remembering, blessing. And if you think about it, sort of the typical modern evangelical church today tends to be pretty focused on, providing unique content in a way that it's real easy to sort of slip into this consumeristic approach to spiritual formation. Like it's our job to entertain almost. We're conditioned by modern life, really, to want stimulation every moment of the day. Brian talked about this last week. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's bad to try to keep our time together engaging and interesting, but repetition is needed if anything is going to kind of go beyond what our momentary attention span is. And the truth is, if I am left to my own devices, I am going to tend to forget the goodness of confession or the essential need for praise. If my prayers rely on my feelings in the moment and whatever thoughts I might be generating on my own, I'm going to pretty easily stray from what is most real and what is really good for my soul. And that repetition sort of brings me back again and again and keeps me on track. And this brings me to what I think is the biggest benefit of liturgical prayer rhythms, and that is the formation of habits. My house church right now is going through a book called the Liturgy of the Ordinary. And the premise of this book is that we all have habits that form us in one direction or another. As we go through our days, we all have habits like making the bed or brushing our teeth or consuming social media. We don't really give those things much thought. That's the nature of a habit, is it becomes automatic and sort of beyond our need to think about it. But if we can begin to wake up to these habits and be more intentional about them, we can make adjustments so that these mundane habits are pointing us in the direction of faithfulness and love. So we can attach meaning to things that previously were kind of meaningless and take advantage of those habits. Our habits a lot of times seem really trivial on their own, But the accumulation of sort of mundane moments and habits end up forming a life. So how I spend this day and then this day and then this day culminates in the quality of my life as a whole. So the daily rhythms are really, really important, even though in the moment they seem to not matter very much. So a regular daily practice of liturgy provides us sort of with these holy interruptions throughout the day that can wake us up to the presence and activity of God and help us to really participate in that reality. Now, there's really accessible ways to kind of dip your toes into liturgical prayer rhythms if you've never done that before. There's a couple of online resources that I have really enjoyed. The first one is Shane Claiborne's Common Prayer app. That one happens to be free, and it's pretty good, actually. That would be what I would recommend that you start out with if this is something you think you might be interested in trying. Another one that I really love is Celtic Daily Prayer, and I had the physical book. If any of you have that, if I borrowed it to you, I can't seem to find it anymore since we moved, but I discovered that there's a Kindle version of it. That Celtic Daily Prayer was developed by the Northumbria community in Ireland. And in the Kindle version, they have like audio clips of the community singing their prayers, and you can like click on something so that you can kind of hear the voices of the community members going through compline before you go to bed. It's really kind of cool. Unfortunately, that Kindle version of that book is pretty expensive. It's like $35, but I just really enjoyed that. You can also find apps for kind of the more traditional Anglican Book of Common Prayer. I personally have found that one to be kind of clunky and cumbersome and formal, so I don't really use it, but it's there and it's free. And aside from the online resources, you can also order the physical books that those communities use. So like this is the Common Prayer app, or the Common Prayer book that Shane Claiborne designed. So now I'm going to end with just a few tips, and then I'm going to take any questions that you have, and then we're going to go through a little bit of liturgy together. The first tip that I have is that I find it helpful to take a moment of silence before you begin, and that helps you sort of transition from what you've been doing and thinking about into a more prayerful place. If you're praying at home, it can be helpful to have sort of a little space that you've prepared for prayer, but that's not necessary. Another suggestion is that I think it's really helpful to read out loud, even if you're by yourself. When we read silently, we're more inclined to kind of skim the words, but when you read out loud, I think it has more of a chance for those words to penetrate and get into your heart. And lastly, I just would really recommend that you go slowly and strive to really be present to the words that you're speaking, and to also be mindful of the other people around the world, the saints who are praying these same prayers. I've come to really love thinking about this little community in Ireland their voices, I'm coming to know their voices, and I sort of have come to think of them as my friends. The last thing I'll say is that these liturgies are meant to be aids to prayer, not burdens or legalistic requirements. If you'd like to try praying the daily office, give it some time, cut yourself some slack. If you find it unhelpful, set it aside for a time, try it at a later date. If you find it's not helpful at all, don't beat yourself up. It is not a necessary way of praying. But like I said, I have done this for years on and off. I switch resources for a time, I'll set it aside, but I always end up coming back. And I am personally really glad for the help and the direction that it's provided. So with that, I'll open it up if any of you have questions or comments or anything like that.
Terri, this is Brett. I guess one of the criticism I've heard, and Angela and I worshiped in an Anglican church when we were in Labrador for 2 years because we were there to be part of the church that was there. But one of the criticisms I've heard from some of my friends in more of the evangelical churches, they view liturgy as kind of a dead exercise. I guess, how do you find life and meaning in it? And I don't agree with that, but I'm interested to hear what you say about that.
Yeah, it's actually really ironic that I'm covering liturgy and that I have come to value it, because I grew up Catholic and I hated liturgy. I converted from Catholicism to Pentecostalism, which is the polar opposite end of the spectrum. And as a Pentecostal, I would have said it's exactly what you said, Brett. It's dead. It's lifeless. It's, you know. But as I've aged, I've really come to appreciate. I think it absolutely can be dead, a dead form of worship. I think when I engage in it and sort of thoughtlessly, it becomes just this rote thing that I'm doing. But if I challenge myself to be present to the words, to the prayers, and use it as an aid, I think it's really, really helpful. And what I've noticed is that it keeps me centered. Like I said, I, for years, did not use liturgies. And what I find is that people sort of drift off in directions that are really unhelpful if they aren't sort of tethered down to sort of the prayers that have come before them. And so those are the ways that I find it helpful. But yes, it can absolutely be a dead, meaningless, worthless exercise if you don't show up with your whole heart and engage in the prayers meaningfully.
Brett, I've encountered this maybe an analogy or some to kind of differentiate a little bit of liturgy from other forms of worship or prayer, in that in like arts, you've got like arts like theater or music, live music and stuff, where the movement happens in the moment, where like you watch the change sort of happen, versus like a painting, which is a static object that never changes. And but the movement that happens is more so when you go back to that static object, you see the change in yourself versus the change in the art form itself. So I found that kind of helpful to think of. Liturgy can be kind of a static, permanent anchor in your life that you're always coming back to and measuring yourself and your change over the years. And I just kind of found that as a helpful analogy.
Terri, I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about, I don't even know if you have any thoughts about this, but the difference between doing liturgy by yourself versus doing it communally.
Yeah. I think it's hard to find ways of engaging in, for instance, a daily office, unless you're living in an intentional community. You're just necessarily not going to have a community of people who are going to do this with you. I have done it, engaged in it with others at different points. And I love that. And I wish I had that more. I think it's how it was intended, which is why I think that I have come to think of myself as doing it with the community, even though I'm generally by myself when I do it. I think it's one of the benefits of it is I'm not just praying individual prayers, I'm praying with a church. And I find that really beautiful.
Yeah, Terri, I agree with you on that. And I think it helps also that they're not, when we're doing the liturgical prayer, we're not just praying using our own words, right? They're shared words, which in the past has helped me. What I also like about it when I've done it is that it kind of stretches me to, like, I'm not not proud of this, but I'm not just an innately thankful person. And so, in liturgical prayer, you start with thanksgiving or praise, which is, for me, is a very good discipline. And also, I also forget to pray for other people sometimes. All of those really essential elements are kind of built into the pattern, which I really like.